there, and welcome to our first lesson in period 3 for APUS history. We are contextualizing period 3 today. So here is the objective from the College Board. It's very similar to the introductory objective for all of the units. Explain the context in which America gained independence and developed a sense of national identity. So this gives us a clue as to what this entire unit is focusing on. Number 1, American independence, and number 2, the development of a national identity. So this lesson is really an introduction to the ideas that you are going to come across throughout this whole unit. And as always, you can go ahead and click down in the description if you would like some guided notes to follow along with as we go through this lesson. So we're going to start by looking at what is contextualization. We're going to review some of the information from units 1 and 2. We're going to look at North America before 1754. We're going to pay specific attention to some of the philosophical and religious movements happening during the time, and then hit the concept of national identity, but also bring in the idea of regional variations. So what is contextualization? In the previous units, I've described contextualization as either a funnel or as a row of dominoes that are set up. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what are the processes, developments, etc., that are happening in the time period of our lesson, our event. And so in this case, really the main topic, the main development happening in period 3 is going to be the American Revolution. So if we were talking about the domino idea of contextualization, we'd be thinking about what are the dominoes leading up to the American Revolution and what are the dominoes that follow. And so thinking about it as a period of time, a continuum, what is happening in chronological order here. If we think of it like a funnel, we're thinking about, okay, the American Revolution is the smallest part of the funnel. What are some of the things above it? What are the broader ideas that are contributing to the American Revolution? And so this image here is giving you just another idea of how to think about contextualization. What are the various economic, environmental, political, social, and global developments that are impacting the American Revolution? And so when you kind of think about these specific characteristics, it might bring into your mind a couple other ideas, and that might help you to describe what's the information? What should people know about this time period before they dig into the American Revolution? So let's dive into what North America was like before 1754. So if we're looking at our European powers, the map is showing their regional boundaries. So the ones that we have paid particular attention to in APUS history has been England, France, and Spain. And you can see that their regional boundaries are defined according to this map. However, in reality, there were a lot more contested areas. For example, as Georgia develops, they really consider Georgia to be a protective boundary for the rest of the colonies. So that if Spain were to desire more land, that Georgia would be able to kind of protect the other colonies from that expansion. So we still see a lot of contested areas that aren't really shown on this map. When we think about demographics in 1754 or in the 1750s, there's around 1.2 million, 1.3 million people in the British colonies. That does not include American Indians. And you can see about 83% of the colony is white, 17% being black, and that is going to vary based on which region. By the end of this unit, we're going to see the British colonial population be more than 5 million. And then what's not depicted on this map is American Indians. American Indians before and after 1754 are engaging in shifting alliances. So they are beginning to ally more consistently with other Native American tribes to resist the encroachments on their lands by European powers. And they're also having to shift their European alliances. So with the French and Indian War in 1754, the French will be expelled from North America. And so the American Indians that had previously been allied with the French will now have to shift their alliance to the British if they want to maintain the same trade relationships. So we also see at this time significant efforts to maintain sovereignty and autonomy. So there's two main strategies for how American Indians will do this. They will either resist, and that is going to be through various attacks. In this unit, you'll learn about Pontiac's Rebellion is probably one of the more major ones in the Battle of Fallen Timber. So there's various physical, violent attacks that happen to try to maintain their lands and their cultural autonomy. But then there's also negotiations that place. So that various treaties that develop trying to negotiate and actually have formal documentation that would force the British or the Americans to recognize the sovereignty of American Indians. So there's some information regarding some of the more global impacts that are affecting North America at this time. Here's also a map of the various cultural and linguistic boundaries of Native American groups. And these are going to play a really important role in the ways that Native Americans try to resist the European encroachments onto their land. Okay, let's shift to philosophical and religious movements. These have a really important impact on not only the movement for independence, but also on the national identity that begins to develop. So just to review, the Enlightenment is more of a philosophical or intellectual movement that began in Europe, and the ideas came across the Atlantic through print culture, through migration of peoples. And so ideas like John Locke's about natural rights, that each person has these rights of life, liberty, and property. Those begin to influence American attitudes about the purpose of a government and the idea that people consent to a government, but that they can overthrow a government that is no longer meeting the needs of the people. The virtues of republicanism, limited government, separation of powers, representative government, all of those ideas become cornerstones in American ideals. And what you see here is a painting of a tavern. Tavern culture was really significant at this time, and it's where these political and social, intellectual debates often took place. Another really important movement at that time is the Great Awakening. So here's a religious movement. It was like a revival. A lot more people became interested in Christianity. We see some of the formality, especially of Puritan culture, being removed. As you can see in this image, this is not happening. This preaching is not happening within the walls of a church. Rather, it's happening in the open air. And so how does the Great Awakening impact the independence movement and ideas of national identity? Well, it really develops kind of an anti-authoritarianism attitude. And so the idea that church members can criticize their leaders, that they have a right to contest the things that are being told to them, really begins to impact the way that Americans viewed leadership in general. All right, the final thing that we're going to address as far as contextualization for period 3 is the idea of national identity. So as I already mentioned, the ideas of the Enlightenment really began to impact political attitudes. And you can see some of these beliefs that Americans had: fair and peaceful elections, consent of the governed, equality, civil liberties. All of these things are still important to Americans today. These are kind of the core ideas of our democracy. And those ideas start to take root in this time period. They begin to be shown in the foundational documents. We also see some core values: individualism, justice, free enterprise. Some of the core values that many Americans hold today as being really important begin to be more explicitly defined. However, it's not to say that all people agreed to these things equally. For example, if we take the idea of roles of women, the emergence of the Republican motherhood is something you're going to be learning about in this unit. And this is the idea that women are responsible for educating their sons to become good citizens and to become the future leaders in the republic. And so because of that, women also need to obtain an education. Now, this idea It did affect all the colonies, but not all the colonies or the states equally. It was much more centered in New England, where there's a larger population of white women. As we see larger populations of Black women in the South, Republican motherhood is not going to apply to them. They are going to have either domestic roles in the home of white people, or they are going to be working in the fields. And so the idea of them obtaining an education to cultivate citizenship in their sons is not going to be happening. Also, American Indian women are going to experience a shifting amount of power in their communities. American Indian women in some communities had a more matrilineal or sense of power in their tribes. And as the American Indian tribes begin to resist more through warfare, women aren't going to be as involved in that. And so they lose some of that power that they had. And so we see regional variations on the roles of women significantly. Thinking about the core value and political attitudes about equality, this did not affect all regions equally either. For example, slavery. We see the growth of anti-slavery sentiments in northern regions. Areas like the Northwest Territory will have a ban on slavery, and states in the North are going to abolish slavery either through their state constitutions or through gradual emancipation. And so we definitely see the ideas of the independence movement, the ideas of the revolution impacting northern states to begin the process of providing equality for Black Americans. However, as the South increases and expands into the deep South and increases their reliance or the growth of the cotton crop, we're going to see the desire for enslaved labor increase. And so the ideas of the revolution, equality, did not impact the South the same as it did the North. Another regional variation that I want to address is the idea of frontier culture. And this is a area that has not really been included in the curriculum significantly. But what we see is about 20% of Americans are living in the frontier. And that just means the area between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. And many of these immigrants or many of these migrants are going to be landless and poor. So there's a significant lack of education, church membership. And so we're going to see kind of a dichotomy of perception about these people. Sometimes they are lifted up as the most independent, hardworking type of American that's just really down to earth and displays a lot of the characteristics that we value: free enterprise, individualism. But more often they are going to be seen, they're going to be called squatters and crackers. They're going to be, it's going to become really a stereotype of people who live in the South, and it's going to be a really negative one. And so while we see some of these political attitudes, this emphasis on the roles of our founding fathers demonstrating more of an elite way of life, we also want to recognize that that wasn't true in all areas. And many of the people who lived on the frontier did not feel connected to the ideas of government or necessarily want to participate equally in the revolutionary movement. So when we think about the context of America gaining independence and developing a sense of national identity, we want to recognize there's a broad variety of things that are impacting this, thinking globally with our European powers, thinking environmentally with the different regions and the economic impact of living in those regions. We think religious and philosophical movements. There's a whole variety of things that play into this context, and I hope that you will consider how these things impacted the revolutionary movement as we continue through this unit. So I hope this was helpful for you in introducing the unit. And if so, please like and subscribe.